Welcome everybody to Talking Art in Maine. Several months ago, esteemed art critic Carl Little contacted me to ask if I might be interested in interviewing tonight's guest, acclaimed American realist painter John Moore, who is seated right here. The fine art publisher Marshall Wilkes in Ellsworth was going to be releasing a book of John's work containing 82 beautiful color reproductions of his phenomenal paintings, along with literary contributions by Carl Little, Suzette McAvoy, John Stomberg, Rosanna Warren, Christina Key, Vincent Katz, John Yao, and Jeffrey Young. So of course, I gladly said yes. And tonight we'll be looking at 23 paintings that appear in the Portals book. So for those of you who are here tonight, you probably right now can't read the handout because it's very dark, but there is one that details John's many accomplishments. So we're not going to spend too much time on that just because we've got a lot of beautiful images to look at together. But he has had over 48 solo exhibitions. He's got over 40 works in the William Louis Dreyfus Foundation, and he's in the permanent collection of many museums. So check out that handout once the lights come back on. And let's dig into some of these beautiful paintings of yours, John. So let's get going here. So I figured since John's work may be new to some of you, that it might make sense to cross one of John's bridges together. And so this, does anybody recognize this bridge, by the way? I can't. Yeah. Yes.
It's the footbridge, yes, and
yeah.
Topsom, yes.
Yes. And what was the significance of this bridge for you?
We had been down in Brunswick a number of years, going to the museum, sort of driving around. I saw that bridge, and I was first kind of impressed with its scale and with how simple and beautiful it is. And then when I found out that it was designed basically for workers to get from Topsom to the mills in Brunswick, that made it even more interesting. And so I should say that I'm not a on-the-spot painter. This was done basically from initial drawings and photographs and the like. But what made it particularly interesting is that I had been down there a number of times, and I grew up in St. Louis, and I remember certainly the Mississippi flooding. And I was down there one day when the water was almost up basically to the edge of the bridge. And I thought that would give that painting much more of an edge, basically, if I made it a little bit more about flooding. And so that's what sort of led to that painting. There's two versions of that. There's another larger version, but that one is about 60 inches tall, approximately. But anyway, both its history, what it served, and what was taking place in my own experience standing there is what made the painting really interesting.
So when you were looking at the photographs, so you saw it live being very flooded.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I've never been able to do anything. I've never been able to do a work from a photograph that I have not had direct experience with a particular place. So it's just a photograph. It's just an image, basically. But the resonance that a place has is really only experienced on site, and that's what makes things sort of come alive, and makes you want to make a painting about it. So.
Right. Okay. So let's move along to Tuesday. This one is 54 inches by 72, and you painted this in 2018. And you've said that the color of light in Maine is something that is concrete from which everything else is measured. What did you mean by that?
One of the things that sort of drew me to Maine initially was, the first time I came here was the summer of 1974 to teach at Skowhegan. And I was really struck by not only the fact that there's not a lot of humidity in the summer, but the quality of light, which is, light in Maine has a kind of pristine sort of quality because there's not so much humidity in the air or something like that. It's very clear, it's very crisp, and you recognize right away when you're not here. In a number of these paintings, the actual light in the painting is seen out of my studio window in Belfast. The site might be combined from someplace else, but the light basically is really rooted here.
Right.
This painting is based on a site it's in Bangor. It's near Sea Dog Restaurant. And when I used to see those tracks, I never had no idea whether It was still an operating thing. But I was out there one day, and this huge locomotive comes slowly down the tracks. I thought, something's still going on there, it's still active. But this is, again, a composite, because part of the distant landscape is invented from another place.
Okay.
The river's there, the bridge is there, the tracks are there. The right side is pretty much there, but the left side is not. So
Okay. All right.
Enhanced.
Yes, enhanced. Okay. And in Portals, in the book, John Stomberg has called your landscapes poetic naturalism. How do you prefer to describe your work?
Well, actually, that's probably one of the better ways I've been described. I don't mind that. But, I'm just a representational painter.
Okay. This next one is called Eerie Evening. It's 72 by 61. This was painted in 1996. And when I look at this painting, I think about the person who lived next to a shipping channel, and either before or after work or on the weekends, they created some kind of a garden to beautify their backyard. Is that kind of what you were going for when you painted it, for people to have that kind of reaction maybe? Or
I can tell you specifically about this painting that we had driven across country and we were coming back and the idea on the return basically was to go from Chicago to the Art Institute I hadn't been to for a number of years, to Cleveland, to the Cleveland Art Institute, to Buffalo. And we left Chicago, we were driving to Cleveland, but it was too far to go. So we stopped at a motel on the road. And it had just recently opened. We were looking for some place to eat. And the woman who was at the motel said, well, go down to this town now. And so we drove down there, and it's Concord, Ohio. And I just felt like this sort of brigadoon moment. I walked into some place that had probably unchanged from the 50s, it was still there. And it's a shipping channel on Lake Erie. And those are big fragments of ore, the ships back and forth. But overlooking that, there was a formal garden, that probably the Chamber of Commerce put there basically to sort of beautify that space. And that had a particular kind of resonance to me because I was thinking about our experience of the environment and all. That was very touching to me that was there. So that was what that painting was about. So
okay.
I've done a small version of that, and that's the larger version.
Okay. And you've said that your background informs everything from your subject matter to the style in which you paint. Would you like to talk a little about that?
Well, yeah. I grew up in a working class family, in St. Louis. My father was a mailman. My mother was a secretary. And I think that in some respects, I always tell students this, whatever kind of experience basically formed you is the bedrock of your work. And if you get away from that, you're going to be losing something that's crucial. I think probably one of the things that attracts me to particular sites is the way that it resonates with a previous kind of experience that I might have had. That there's something about this place that I know, as opposed to someplace else that I see, but I don't have the kind of experience with it. I think we were talking before about Joan Didion had written this piece about how an image basically in her mind kind of shimmers for a long time before it actually becomes written down. Mm-hmm. I think that happens, it's like you see something, maybe a year later, it's still there, when it comes back, and then you start to think about what you can possibly do with it and all, because a lot of other associations sort of accrue to it at the same time. So yeah, that's part of what I meant. So
okay. Okay. Let's go on to Stillwater Spring. This one is 90 by 75 inches. These are all oil on canvas, unless I say otherwise. Yeah. And you painted this one in 2008. And as I understand it, the mill buildings in the background are from Coatesville, PA,
That's
right?
Correct. Yeah.
But the river is based on the Passagassawakeg, did I say that right? In Belfast. So what was the inspiration of putting those two images together?
Well, actually, on that particular site, the river is not that wide.
Oh.
It's the river there is the east branch of the Brandywine River that goes through Coatesville.
Okay.
And it goes down basically in sort of an underground. But I wanted to get into that painting a little bit of the history of Coatesville, and there's on the bottom of the painting, there's a little bit of the ruins, basically, of what was one of the original mill buildings. Now, it's not there in that particular place. It's further downstream. But I brought it up, and widened the river at the same time. The river is as you mentioned before, it's in Belfast, and I drive by it all the time. And there was that stump of a tree, was sitting in the water. It kind of located basically the center of the painting. So it went in. So
yeah.
I mean, serendipity basically is part of the game, so.
Those little stilts up there, what are those?
I think that what happens there is that just right beyond where you can see there's a little waterfall and it goes down and it goes underground. And I think those are there basically as a marker that the water is going to change at this point.
Oh.
I never knew exactly what they were there for, but it certainly is there.
Okay. And in Portals, you had said that space, color, and light are the initial triggers for paintings, but you need to know a place before you can paint it. So how do you typically become familiar with a place?
It depends on where I am, I think that, I think repeated experience, basically, I mean, sometimes when I'm sort of driving someplace, I think, there's a painting there. And other times, basically, things that happen that are totally unexpected. I could tell you, you want to hear the story about another painting?
Oh, sure. Why not?
Right. I had a studio in a loft building in Philadelphia. And I was one of the few artists that were initially in that building, and gradually it sort of filled up. And every year around Christmas, the guys who owned the building would have a party. And so I'm down there at this party, and I realized I'm the oldest guy here, Everybody else in this building is young. And so I walked back up to my studio, and I'm sort of feeling bad about myself, and how old I am. And I'm looking at the window of my studio, and my dark studio. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, there's a painting here, And I would not have gotten that experience, basically, if I had not been really kind of rejected by all the young people that were in the rest of the building. So, it's like you never can tell, basically, when something's going to open up. And that certainly was the case there. So,
wow. Okay, let's move along to Sunday Evening Summer. This you painted in 2009, and this is 90 inches by 75 inches. And I love the color formation, the cloud formations and the grasses that are in this painting. They're so beautiful. Is this a collaged image?
Yes.
Aha.
Yeah, because the bridge that's there, which has been aborted, is not there in that particular place.
Okay.
But across the river, that's exactly the way it was. Those are the mill buildings. No, I think that sky just sort of came out of something I noticed one evening when I was in Belfast, and just kind of sort of developed it from that.
Right.
But this is one of a series of 4 paintings of Coatesville that are about the seasons. This one, I think, this is fall. I think.
Well, it says summer.
It's summer.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were just checking to see if I was paying attention.
I know what fall is now. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so here's a question. We'll see if I can say it the right way. So you've spent a long time portraying industrial buildings and settlements around industrial buildings. So are there things from that era that you wish would come into modern life, like we could bring it to modern?
Not so much. I just think that there's dignity in the fact that they're still there,
Okay.
And there's a kind of, there's a patina of time, basically, that gives something distinction,
Yeah.
I don't remember, one of the questions that you had I think was also about those industrial buildings, but the first time that I started painting those was in the 70s.
Yeah.
And I was teaching at Temple University at the time, and I had gotten access basically to an office in the main campus of Temple University. It was overlooking a vast sort of industrial wasteland in Philadelphia. And I was working down there, and it was in the summer, it was hot, and I would work in the morning before it got unbearable, and then go back out to my studio. And in my studio at that time, there was a program on National Public Radio called The Great Migration. And it was about the first half of the 20th century, when people were moving from the South, giving up sharecropping and looking for jobs in the North.
Right.
And they were working in factories that were directly out there in front of me. And so I could see in these buildings the faded brickwork, that said Baldwin locomotives, or Philly cigars, or flexible flyers. And yet, when I'm looking at those buildings, these people that worked in those buildings, we're talking about the experience of working in them and all. And it just really opened up that whole idea, basically, of my attraction to that subject, and when people were talking about that, in some of those businesses, there was no air conditioning in the summer, I think that was really basically sort of charged my connection basically to those kinds of places. Coatesville was that in spades. So.
Right. Okay. This is called Millsite. This is a charcoal drawing from 2004, 44 inches by 43. And so in addition to painting, you've had this amazing teaching career as well. And my curiosity is, what advice or sayings were you known for amongst your students?
When I first started teaching at Tyler, this is in the 70s, there was no direct painting class. I think I was probably the first representational painter that was hired then and all. Wow. And they asked me if I would like to teach a class called direct painting. It was beyond the basic classes, So that kind of defined my time, basically, when I was in Philadelphia, although I also did graduate students at the same time. In my life in teaching, I've always gravitated back and forth between teaching foundation painting, which I love to teach, and then doing tutorial work with graduate students. And there's a vast difference, of course, because with the graduate students, they're determining what it is they want to do, and my responsibility basically was to help them find the kernel, that's important in the work and all. With the undergraduates, on the other hand, that basic painting class is all pretty much, it's like week 3, you're going to be doing complementary color. Week 4, you're going to be doing this. Week 5, you're going to be this. So it's all sort of laid out. But the contrast between those two things was really always sort of refreshing to me. I taught for 42 years and all. And the last year that I taught, I thought, this is the last time I'm ever going to do this. I'm counting down the weeks until the semester's over. And yet I had one of the best classes I ever had. I had this graduate drawing class, and I thought, oh my God, these kids are great. So it's not that I miss teaching, because I don't. I love to go to my studio every day now. But that was really an important part of my life that was consequential.
So it sounds like you also told students, like, okay, remember what you grew up with, because you got to stick with that. So that was something that you said, but you didn't otherwise really have stock phrases or anything.
You'd have to talk to my students and ask them about that.
Okay, fair enough.
But I would say, develop that,
develop that. Awesome. Okay, so this is called Bridge. This was painted in 2000. It's 64 by 72. And does anybody recognize this bridge? Trick question. This is a little bit tougher probably to pick out. Anyone? Okay, well, it's the Route 3 bridge, I believe, in Augusta. Yeah. And this painting is also a composite, right? Yeah, and I read that the little plastic flowers here, those marked an accident site, right? Is that true?
Yeah, I can get to that in a minute. But is the next slide basically?
Yeah, we can go ahead and look at this.
This is a painting by Ferdinand Wallmüller. He's an Austrian painter. It was painted, I think, 1780, something like that.
1865.
1865. A friend of mine, a painter who was in Dresden, had sent me this postcard. And I had that tacked up in my studio for a really long time. And I never heard of this painter before. I don't know very much about his work beyond he did occasional portraits of Beethoven. But I had this painting, and I would sort of imagine what was going on here, like those children now, they're all dead, probably there's a bridge, the stream is widened, there's now a bridge over it. There's probably some tract houses down here, but the connection is still the trees. The trees were still there. So is the next slide up?
Let's see.
That's a watercolor, right? That is a watercolor that was based on that painting. There is the tree, the sycamore tree that's over there on the left. There are these trees. And I saw these trees basically as a screen through which you would sort of move into the painting. And that was the beginning, basically, of what ultimately became that painting, because that was there. And now, can you go back to the
first one? Let's doop, doop.
Now, that's the painting. The sycamore tree is still there. The other trees, those are all there. But over time, my visits to that site, had changed. For one thing, that's the bridge on top. I put that river in Augusta there and in place of the stream that was there before. There's tract houses in the foreground here. And below the tree on the left, there are those, it's like a roadside memorial, It's like there was an automobile accident there or something, and people come and basically memorialize that site.
Yeah.
And the year that I was working on this painting, when I would drive from Monroe to the transfer station in Brooks, I would go by this little spot, basically, where the grass is always cut. There's always plastic flowers put there. And even though seasons had changed, it was always kept up. And so I thought, well, that could be the kids. That's where the kids were, And so the colors that are there basically are the colors that were on children's clothing, in the previous painting.
Oh.
So that's one thing. The other thing is, on that bridge, I had originally, probably in the late 70s, been out on that bridge making drawings of Augusta across the river.
Yeah.
And I remember laying my sketchbook on that rail there. But now there's a chain link fence that goes up over it. I didn't know why that was there. If you drive to the Bronx, you don't want people throwing cinder blocks over onto the cars that are on below you, So that serves a practical purpose. But in this particular case, no, I didn't know why it was there. And someone was telling me that when they closed the mental institution on this side of the river in Augusta, people were supposed to get medication. They walk across that bridge and commit suicide. There were a number of suicides on that bridge, and so that's why that screen was sort of put up there. So I put that in, and that's where the falling leaves are there, kind of an allusion to that. This painting, in some respects, is kind of a memorial, but it was really inspired by that wonderful Wall-Muller painting. Again, I don't know anything else, what other paintings he might have made, but that one is just...
That one did it for you.
Yeah, that did it.
Whoops, there. Frühling im Wienerwald, which means spring in the Vienna woods.
He did actually at least 3 paintings of that same thing with exactly the same kids in exactly the same place, except one of them has snow on the ground. Basically, there's 3 different seasons in which he kept everything exactly the same, the trees, the kids, everything else.
Wow.
But basically changed the landscape to reflect the fact that it's a different season.
Wow. All righty. Let's talk about All Souls Day. This is from 2012. I don't have the dimensions, but what makes this painting, which is set in Kensington, a favorite of yours?
This is where I grew up. I mean, I did not actually grow up in Kensington, but as my wife would say, that's your Wellston painting. Wellston is where I grew up in the district of St. Louis. And that kind of playground there, is probably where I spent a lot of time when I was a kid. The row houses there, are exactly like that part of that district in St. Louis. There are some things about that painting that are changed, of course. It's partly composite because that fence that's in the foreground there is not actually there. But what inspired that painting was the fact that a guy that I knew who was a photographer working at Temple University had done a series of photographs, basically, of public playgrounds, in urban neighborhoods. That was one of the photographs. And I asked him so that again is a photograph that I had stuck on my wall, black and white photograph for a long time before I could really kind of open it up, and sort of get into it. But I love that painting and all. It's got the train, it's got the whole thing. It's the row houses, the churches, it's factories, the whole thing. It's got the whole panorama. So
okay. Let's move along to Dutch Pink and Italian Blue. This was painted in 1993. It's 72 by 72. And in this I see beautiful colors, this amazing perspective, the curving smoke shapes, just a lot of beautiful detail. And how do you start a painting with so much detail like this?
The story of this painting is that when I was living in Boston, I used to take the Amtrak train from South Station in Boston to Manhattan. And I passed that, this is in Queens, I passed that, I see that all the time. And I thought, I want to do something with that. So I had sort of planned a trip. I had my camera with me, and I knew the train was slowing down as it got near there. And so I was all ready, and I just shot took a lot of pictures, basically, passing by. Took them back out to my studio. A lot of the photographs, because the frame was moving, were slightly blurred and all, but I had enough information, basically, that I could start to make that painting.
Yeah.
So probably the bottom bottom half of that painting is pretty much what was there. And then the rest was kind of elaborated from what was there before, developed from what was there before. But it's Queens, and I think it's a Greek Orthodox church that was in the process of being built. I think that's what it is. But
looks that way, doesn't it? And when do you know, for you, when is the painting done?
With this one, I don't know. I worked on it a long time. I guess when there's nothing else I could do with it, I think, probably. So.
Fair enough. Okay. Next we have Pause. This is from 1993, and this is 72 by 62. So we talked earlier about that cool Joan Didion quote about the shimmering things in your mind, and you got to kind of like lay low and let them just, not get in their way. So how do you get out of your own way in the studio? What do you do to sort of let that stuff flow?
The initial inspiration for this painting was both the suburban neighborhood where I grew up, which my parents moved to the suburbs when I was like about 12 years old. I hated it. But beyond that, there was a photograph in the Philadelphia Inquirer of Levittown in 1950. And these children were basically sort of posing in this photograph. And that's the only thing that I kept out of that photograph. But it got that painting going, basically, because the children, the sidewalk, the street that has all those tar things, that's the way that's in St. Louis. In the background there's Standard Press Steel, that green building, and that was in Jenkintown, where we were later were moved to Philadelphia. That factory building recently burned, and it, apparently it's a lot of pollution, basically, in that neighborhood. Oh. People were evacuated from that neighborhood because of the toxic fumes that were sort of coming out of there. But the thing about this, there are tract houses on that street, and the fronts of those houses have big windows in them, but they're usually covered over. But on the sides that are opening out into gardens, there are also these big windows. So you'd see that when you would drive by there, and that's what really kind of got that painting. There's also there's a plaster rooster there. There's a empty lawnmower. There's a for sale sign down the street, and all those little sort of details get sort of put in. You're working on something for a couple of months, so
right.
They're not there in the beginning.
Right. Let's move along to Coatesville. Now, we're going to look at some of your workscapes, as art critic Alexi Worth affectionately calls them. So Coatesville reminded you of the town you grew up in, correct?
Coatesville, the first time that I was there was an accident. We had gone out to Lancaster. We was in Pennsylvania. We had gone out to Lancaster County with a friend of mine who was teaching sculpture. And on our way back, we inadvertently wound up in Coatesville. We thought we were bypassing a winter. And as soon as we drove down to Coatesville, I thought, I know this place. I've been here before, those black mill buildings, the whole thing, I knew exactly what that was. And I wanted to go back out there, and do something with it. So we were living in Philadelphia at that time. I also knew that a number of American artists had been there. Ralston Crawford had been there and had made an iconic painting, basically, of one of the mill buildings. Charles Demuth had done at least two paintings that were based on Coatesville. One is called After the Parade, Coatesville. The other one's called Incense of the New Church. Both of those paintings that he made were made from the train going over that bridge. And so they're composites, But I went out there with the idea of finding out where they had made their paintings and to sort of reconnect with that place. And so I had a catalog of Ralston Crawford's paintings. I found the exact spot where he had made the painting. I'm standing there, and he made the painting in 1936. I'm standing there in 1986. It's 50 years later, and practically nothing had changed. It was still the same profile of the building. It was all still the same. Demon's paintings, as I told you before, were not in a specific place. So they were composites, basically glimpsed from the train and all. But I wanted to get an overview of Coatesville, so I knew there was a cemetery on top of the hill, and if there's a cemetery, there has to be a way to get up there. So I wound up basically in a sort of a playground overlooking the whole town. That's where that painting came from.
Wow.
But I would get up every morning at 5 o'clock in Philadelphia, drive out to Coatesville to be there about about 6. The neighborhood was not that's great. The sun was just coming up, and everything was sort of bathed in that sort of morning light. That was what that painting was about. I made a number of trips out there at that time, very early in the morning. Right now, a lot of those buildings they're still there, but they're abandoned. But there's still activity going on in that.
Yeah.
In some of those mill buildings. In fact, Coatesville was in its prime in the 50s when they were building skyscrapers and bridges in Manhattan. And a lot of the steel was coming out of Coatesville. Huh. Now, I think, I don't know the history of that place, but I think they had the longest rolling mill or whatever, where they could make the longest, whatever, something. Yeah. They made something, and they still make it, but it's owned by a different company. So in that parking lot there now, where there might have been 200 cars, there's maybe 50 cars there now. It's not dead, it's still going on. But
right. Huh. So, okay, this painting is called Factory, and this was painted in 2000, and it's 40 by 36. And I keep bringing up my dad tonight, but this would have been his favorite painting of yours, I would have to think.
Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah. Why?
Partly, well, I think those bull horns on this one, he was also a draftsman, like he was a mechanical and electrical engineer, and he loved flowers. So I think the combination of all that, he would have wanted me to ask you, what are those bull horns for?
Actually, Rosanna Warren called this painting the horny painting. Now, what it is, that's a building that's in St. Louis that I knew very well because it was a small arms factory. It was built for making munitions in World War II. Oh. And those things are basically, there's windows inside there, and it's to open up basically and let all the heat out of the building. It's totally functional. I mean, there's nothing in this building that's decorative, It's like industrial architecture is not decorative for the most part. So everything, that's what that was. If you can see past that, I don't know if you can, back there.
Go to the next one? Oh, sorry.
Right up there, you can see a little bit. The windows are right there. They run all the way along on both sides. And this stuff here is part of the mechanism for opening and closing that, It's basically, it's strictly sort of functional.
Okay.
And a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine when I was growing up, lived in a house that was directly across the street from that building. Mm-hmm. And that was, his fence was there. And then, when I-90 came through, they took away his house, and everything else basically, and there's a wide highway that goes there now. His place is no longer there and all, but I did that remembering the fact that when he still lived there, that's what it looked like,
Oh, okay. Huh. All right, now we come to Miracle Hill. This was painted in 2010. It's 66 by 68. And this is a Civil War mausoleum in Greenville, South Carolina.
Yes.
And it's kind of like super creepy, but I can't take my eyes off it. So what motivated you to paint this?
I had a commission from the Greenville Museum to go down and make a painting, basically, that has something to do with the city of Greenville. And so I was down there for, I don't know, maybe a week or so, walking around, making little drawings and stuff like that. And this is a Civil War mausoleum. It's in a cemetery there to Confederate soldiers. But I didn't do this as a painting initially, I did something else. But like you were saying, this image just kind of haunted me. The fact that it's probably 90 years, maybe 100 years old or something like that, mm-hmm. and that it shows on the surface the scars, of time, and the fact that it's just this big, bulky object. It's magic. And then, of course, in the foreground there are those there's just something that's just starting to sort of little buds, basically, on vines that are there. It's weeds that are in front of that building, but it looks like it's a crypt, basically, from that war. So that's what that painting was about.
Wow. Okay, we're going to go a little faster through some of these others so we have some time at the end for some of the end ones. So this one here is called Lime Kiln. This is a charcoal drawing, 45 by 46. And give it a good look.
It's in Rockport.
It's in Rockport.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's still there.
Yep.
So.
And I looked up what the heck lime kilns were for, and they're kind of interesting. They use them in construction for making cement, mortar, treating water, a bunch of other stuff too, including theaters. You know, when people say you're in the limelight, that's because they used to use lime because it would be really bright. So that's what that came from.
Right? Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So absorb that one, and we'll move along to this absolutely beautiful window painting. This is called Soft Shapes of Late Sunset from 2015. Have you ever seen such a beautiful dirty window before? Okay, I just have to ask you one question about this though. A lot of your window paintings have open windows, and I mean, I could riff about like what that means, but what does it mean to you?
Just let air. No, those windows were in that loft studio that I had in Philadelphia. Yeah. The view out the window is Coatesville. It's late in the afternoon. It's a late afternoon light. Probably I'll open those windows a lot. It allows a couple of things. A contrast basically between the color of the sky through the window and then the color of the sky without the window, you know. So it's like those kinds of plays. But the rest of the painting, the stuff that's on the windows is basically all the patina of time, you know. It's
patina of time. There. I like the Onion Dome Church back there too.
Well, the thing about that is that Coatesville was really worked by immigrants basically from Eastern Europe, and they brought their
religion.
Exactly, you know, and so there are a lot of those Onion Dome buildings, you know, they're in Coatesville.
Beautiful colors, though. I just
Thank you.
Spent a long time looking at that painting. We must move on. Okay, this one is called Foil. I think in honor of the piece of foil down on the, right, 52 by 60, and you painted that one in 2001. Boy, I'd love to keep talking, but then I want time for so I think we're going to keep moving on. Are you okay with that?
Okay, sure, yeah.
All right. This is the one that's on the cover of Portals, and as I understand it, the window is from Pennsylvania.
Same place.
And the outside here is Belfast.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Front Street Shipyard in Belfast.
Yeah.
And these pieces of black tape that are on the window there, I would work in that studio in the winter and then come up here to Maine in the summer. And sometimes when I would be away and the roof would leak, you know, and I came back one summer and my books on a bookcase that was right below that, you know, had been damaged. Every time I would go away, but I would just tape plastic there, and that's what the tape is the residue from, so.
Huh. But I kind of like that you were bringing these two places that you're fond of together, you know?
Yeah.
We should do that more often in our imagination, shouldn't we? Yeah. Beautiful colors, too. Okay, moving along. Look at the color of this, guys. Isn't that amazing? Question here is, a lot of your paintings seem like it's kind of like November, December. You know, like there's no leaves on the trees and stuff.
Oh, yeah, probably is true. Yeah. It's sort of inadvertent. The light in this painting basically is directly out of my studio window in Belfast. That's also the Front Street Shipyard, but I framed it with the factory windows, basically, that were in the studio they had before.
Right. Okay. All right. This one is called Yellow Mist in the Morning, and
same thing.
Same idea. I just I'd read that you like Bob Dylan's music and you listen to it sometime in your studio. What's your favorite Dylan album?
Oh, Telltale Signs.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
it's a double disc, basically, of outtakes, you know, and all. It has absolutely amazing stuff on it. Absolutely amazing stuff. So, yeah.
Do you feel like listening to that music has affected anything in your work, or?
Sometimes I have music that has a particular sort of association with something that I'm working on, you know, and other times not. Sometimes I just sort of listen to music, you know. I used to listen to like opera in the morning, you know, and then other things in the afternoon.
Yeah.
I still like to listen to opera, but I'm totally addicted to Bob Dylan, of course.
Yeah.
So.
Who isn't? Okay. Get ready for this one. This, color, horizontal and vertical lines, so amazing. Why did you put a turnstile from Pennsylvania with a waterworks building from Bangor?
Because I didn't have the building in back available anymore. So, but I wanted to paint that turnstile, you know, that was from Coatesville. And I juxtaposed it basically with a building from the 50s that's the waterworks up in Bangor.
The
pretty straightforward. So
very cool. Okay, now we're going to move along to Night Garden. This was painted in 2003, 66 by 72. This is a favorite painting of yours, and there's a story behind this one.
You want to hear the story?
Oh, yeah.
When we were living in Philadelphia, I had a dog, and having a dog is basically great because you can walk around the city, and if you stop someplace and you're staring in a window and you got a dog with you, nobody's going to call the police. But, you know, in this particular instance, there's an area of Philadelphia called Queen Village, and this is Queen Street in Queen Village. And I had been walking with the dog by there, and there was this piece of land, sort of triangular shape like that I thought was a community garden. And so I wanted to make a painting about that because I was interested in community gardens in Boston. There was one at the end of our neighborhood. So I went back down there with my camera and my sketchbook, and there was a car parked directly where I wanted to be. And so I kind of killed a little bit of time, and the car was still there. There were no other cars on the street, but just this one, and it was right where I wanted to be. And also, finally, I just walked over there and laid my camera on the hood of the car, you know, and I opened my sketchbook. And I'm sort of making little diagrams, basically, of the triangles in this site. And all of a sudden, a door opens and a woman comes out. She says, "What are you doing there?" And I thought, "Oh shit, this is her car," you know. And so I told her, I didn't want to tell her what I was there for. I told her basically I just moved from Boston. I'm really interested in urban gardens. I said, "Is this a neighborhood project?" You know. And when she realized that I was not part of a city agency or something like that, she said, "Oh no," she said that my husband did that. And then she told me the story of this garden, which was that she lived in this house all of her life. And when she got married, her husband moved in with her. They lived in that house and all. But half the houses on the street were taken away when I-95 went over. And there's a little bit of I-95 right up there. And this piece of land right here was left over after I-95 was built as an overpass. And her house was actually right over here. And she told me that every time it rained, all this mud came down from that piece of land into her basement. She said, "I called the police, I called the city." She said, "They said, that's the highway department." I called the highway department. They said, "No, that's federal." She was getting complete runaround. She could never get an answer as to who was responsible for this piece of land. So she said her husband came home and he sort of terraced it, you know, to keep the mud from coming down. And then he put in some flowers, you know, and then she said, and it became his obsession, you know. She said every time he'd come home from work, he'd be out in that garden. So she was telling me all the things that are there, you know, that this came from a church that was demolished, and so forth. And there's a little sort of rubber fountain right there. He had designed this in a way that was totally self-watering because he had barrels that were stuck in there and hoses that were running around through it, and also water itself. And then she said, "But you should have seen it when he was alive." She said, "But he died." She said, "My kids moved away. They don't care about it, you know." And she said, "But you should have seen it when it was at its peak." You know? And I thought, "Oh my God, I could bring that painting back. I could bring that garden back. You know, I could make a painting about it." The only thing that she told me that I thought was sort of funny was that she said, "There's a pink flamingo here." Oh. And she said, when he brought that pink flamingo home, she said, "I said, you've gone too far now." So anyway, I came up here this summer, and that summer I went around with a camera, and every place where there was somebody had planted, you know, I took a photograph of it, and I collaged all those photographs back into this hill, and then I made that painting from that. The flowers and the like, some of them were from a filling station, you know, it was in Bangor. Some of them were, there's a house that is on the corner of 131 and 141 and 139 in Monroe, where somebody sort of planted stuff, you know. So I took little pieces of all that stuff, basically, and put it all together to make that painting. And it became kind of an homage, basically, to her and to the idea, basically, that her husband had first the idea of doing something practical, but then turned it into something that was more than that.
Beautiful.
You know, and so it was really, exactly, it's like, you know, he's going to leave this world and he's going to leave it better than it was when he got here, you know. And so that was really his dream, you know, and I felt privileged, basically, to be able to sort of share in that, you know, and all the fact of the matter is, but I'm a painter, I could do that. And I could bring that garden back again, you know. So that's the story of that painting. So,
has that woman ever seen this painting?
You know, I went back over there because the painting was reproduced in a catalog for a show at her. So I went back over there, and there was nobody at her house. No, there was an aluminum door there. I don't even know if she still lived there at all. But I just left a catalog inside the door. I never heard from her at all. I think that she probably would have recognized that it was her garden, but I don't know that she knew anything else about it. So,
Oh, well, if she's in another realm, maybe she then knows, right?
right.
Okay. Now we come to marker. This is 46 by 46. You painted this in 2019. I love this painting. It
Thank you.
draws me in with the beautiful sunset and that kind of glowy area above the marker. And then, learning a little bit about it, that it's for those who have been lost at sea. Then my mind goes to like all the people that had to learn that, someone they loved perished in the open ocean. Those jobs are not easy. So you've lured me in, and then I'm thinking about this a lot. And is that kind of where you were going with that, or?
Actually, we were down at Port Clyde.
Okay.
And there's a lighthouse there, and I never was in that area because we went down to Port Clyde, was sort of stay, and then take the boat over to Mohegan. But I drove around to see where that lighthouse was, and there is a memorial there, to sailors who have lost their lives at sea, going back to 1928. There are all these names that are sort of engraved on what looks like a tombstone.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make a painting about that, but I didn't want to use a tombstone. So instead, I basically put that sort of circular thing there, and the names are all around there. And that bell is basically the memorial. It's a bell that's no longer ringing, so.
Right. Wow. Okay, this is the last one. This is Vespers, and we have a companion photo of Le Perspective as well. So how do we want to do this? You want to show the other one or talk a little about this first?
Yeah, you can do go to the next one. Yeah, this is a painting by Watteau. It's when we were living in Boston, I would take students over to the Museum of Fine Arts. All the time, I would make sure that we stopped in front of this painting. It's not a very big painting, but it has this beautiful elegiac sort of tone to it. And Watteau, for me, is probably the only painter in the history of art who has a kind of a wistfulness in his work, or a kind of sadness. Now, I never experienced that in anybody else's paintings except Watteau's, to the extent to which I see that in Watteau. So I would take students over there and we'd talk about this painting. It was a commissioned painting. Watteau never painted on site. He filled out sketchbooks with drawings of people. And this is a park in Paris. There's a little pond back here, and this is part of the structure of the building that was person who commissioned this painting. I did not know very much about them except that somebody's playing music, and it's a late evening, time is changing and so forth. But when there was a big Watteau show about 10 years ago, somebody had written extensively about this painting and pointed out in her research that the women that are in this painting are all dressed in contemporary attire, evening attire. But the men are all dressed in costumes that would have been a century earlier. Now, why that was the case, whether or not there's something about time and change or whatever, yeah.
Well,
but it was a deliberate choice, I'm sure. Now, Watteau was a great fan of theater.
That's where I was going.
He did, in fact, so many of his paintings have almost a kind of a theatrical sort of space in them.
Yeah.
This one certainly does too, but it's a very mysterious painting. There's another guy here who's pointing in a direction, basically, and talking to her about sort of going over there. There's a guy here sort of listening, playing music, someone listening to it. There's another figure standing right here that you can barely make out. And then there's two people over here, there's some children over here, and there's yet another guy standing over here looking at the whole scene. And it's so filled with mystery and so touching, I mean, somebody said to me, well, you didn't, I don't know why you like this painting. You didn't live in France, in the 18th century, But it's not that, it's not, it's really just about the emotional content of the work. For me, it's so sort of resonant and touching, I mean, this painting can almost make you cry,
Yeah.
I try not to, but anyways.
Oh, it's good for you. Okay, let's
go.
So
anyway, so keep in mind, basically, in this painting, I had made a couple of oil sketches of this. But there's on the right side. What am I doing?
Hold on. Over here?
Yeah, on the garden on that side. There's a garden on that side. There's a garden on the right side, and then in the center, basically, there is the building. Yeah. So I had a commission a number of years ago to do a painting for a fundraiser for Central Park Conservancy. Yeah. So I'd been up to the park a number of times. And I made a drawing. And one time I was thinking about doing the Bethesda fountain and all. Then I thought, nah, I'm not going to do that. No, I did something else. But I had a couple of drawings of the Bethesda fountain. And that's what came up. There on the left side, of course, you know, is the is part of the garden. On the right side, basically, is my neighbor's garden. And in the center is the Bethesda fountain with the angel turned away from us.
Okay.
And there's one guy who's sitting on a little sort of stone stool over there. That's my neighbor. It was based on him, and he sits out there basically when he's cutting his grass, you know, and just watches the river flow, which is not in this painting at all. But I used him, and I made this painting basically with the idea that there was, it's like evening prayers. Vespers is evening prayers, you know.
Yeah.
That's what this painting is about. In the distance, in the same way that in the Watteau, there's the painting of that structure.
Yeah.
That actually is not that. That's the Philadelphia Museum. This back there. It's a composite of a number of things inspired by the Watteau.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think about all the pennies that must be in the, you know.
All the pennies that must be in the,
because people, you know, they go, whenever you have some kind of an angel and a, you know, some kind of water feature, then who could resist?
Well, you know, this painting basically was done, you know, when everybody was conscious about COVID, you know, and staying in. I don't know that I would have gotten into the idea of this painting as much if it not had been that sort of moment in time.
Rosanna Warren was sort of talking about the solitude of it all, you know, and endings, contemplating endings. So there is that vibe, but I don't know. I just think of all the people making wishes, so.
Yeah, Rosanna mentioned that there were a number of other, in one of the earlier versions of this painting, there were a number of other figures and all, but it was finally sort of focused on just the one guy sitting there and all.
Took them all out, but just have one.
Well, you know, the other thing I didn't mention this is that there was also a photograph in the New York Times when Edward Kennedy died, and there's a group of people that are standing in the cemetery at night, and they're standing around, they're hugging each other, and I thought I could do something with that, no, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
But that was also kind of fed into this in some respects, so it's all of it.
Well, take this all in, everybody. Thank you so much, John, for sharing all of the interesting background. All these, they're so cool. And I think we have time for just a couple questions if anybody has been dying to ask something. Why didn't she ask that? Now's your chance. Yes, right here.
I tend to work the whole surface all the way across, you know, like that. You know, particularly with the window paintings, because everything's on the surface in some respects. But when I was teaching, I used to always talk about the fact that the difference between modern art, you know, and pre-modern is that from the Renaissance on, space is like this. In the modern, it's like this. You know, in other words, it's like two-dimensional. There's the illusion it's not there. It's not about illusional. So the window, I think, sort of plays with that to some extent for me, anyway. You know, the idea basically that you have something on the surface, it's painted on the surface, no, but it's also something that you can see through and see into space. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah.
You know, these are pretty large paintings, and when I work on them for a couple of months, things come in, they go out. Sometimes I have an idea of something, and then it turns out to be not so good, or it needs something else. And so I find some of the source to sort of feed into it. Very specifically, the painting that I did of the form of that garden, you know, in Philadelphia, in Queen Village, was really based on collages that I made over the course of the summer of photographs. I cut them all out, arrange them as though they were on the slope, you know, and then use that basically as the subject, you know, as the source basically for that painting. That's an interesting question, because one of the things that I found out is that I can use my camera to take a picture of something, download it into my computer, mess around with it, and all, print it back out, and then have that basically as the source to do something. That's been a big change recently, you know, because in the past I've used basically photographs that I take with my camera, you know, or slides. One of the things that it does is that each time the image is it's degraded a little bit. Frankly, I don't mind that at all, because when that sort of goes away, then your imagination can come back in. You can sort of bring it back. But I think that that's probably been a fairly recent sort of change. Well, 808 Commonwealth Avenue, of course, is where my studio was. I was on the third floor of that building. And one of the paintings we do not have here, and it's in the book, is a night painting, basically looking out those windows, at the Charles River, and the Shell sign. I made that painting by literally by going over there at night, turning off all the lights except just enough light that I have on the canvas. And also the room was dark. And I made that painting in that way, basically. But yeah, I've used those windows preceded the windows that I was using in Philadelphia in the Globe Dye building. It's the same kind of window, same kind of factory window. Those windows are notoriously inefficient. They do not allow heat to stay in at all. So. I think it's pretty much the same. Right now, I just had a show in Philadelphia and then a show last October in New York. And I've had a little bit of trouble working recently because I feel like I've sort of burned out. I'm trying to get something started, but I don't have a time thing on it, right now, because I've been working on one painting in particular. I keep changing it all. I just keep changing it, and because it's not linking up, so. I don't know. I never felt like I had painter's block, like people have writer's block. But I'm having trouble right now and all. But it'll work out. It'll pass through. So, but some of the paintings take much longer than others do, depending on how much they've changed, depending on what the complexity of the subject matter is. Like the painting, for example, in Augusta with the children. That painting took almost 2 years because I was working on it. I would bring it up here to work on it. I'd take it back to Philadelphia and work on it. That painting took a long time.
It was heavy subject matter too.
Yeah, that was part of it. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That takes.
I suppose in some respects we all kind of romanticize our past, and I probably do that, but I don't know. I think that there's a writer a critic named Hilton Alls, who wrote a biography recently of Catherine Ann Porter, the writer. And he's talked about the fact that her work was the richest when she was tapping into her direct experience growing up in the South. When her work went away from that, it lost its edge. The other thing is, in a very briefly, Alex Katz I was talking to Alex Katz once, and he said, the best advice I ever got was not from art school, it was from my father. My father said, stay in your own backyard. And
stay in your backyard.
that sort of says it all. So.
Yeah.
No. I always use oils. No, yeah.
It's always been oil.
I've always used oil paint, and for a while I tried to use acrylic, but it dries too fast. It feels too flat, I just can't make it have the same kind of depth or whatever or weight, that oil paint does. What I've been recently doing is charcoal drawings, but working back and forth between charcoal drawings, and oil paintings. So.
John, thank you so much for giving us so much time and all the stories.